Hi, my name is Terry. I'm from Kodam Construction in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and we are a restoration company here, and we deal a lot with flooded basements because all the water lands into a basement. And quite often we're having to machine our own doors. And so today I wanted to make a video about how I machine doors with a Porter Cable 9380 hinge butt system. Hinge butt template kit. So I've had my kit since about 2002, and at the time it came in this metal box, and it only came as a 3-hinge setup with 2 long rails. The newer version of this, which is a 59381, comes in a plastic box, and it actually has the same setup as this, except it also comes with an extra bed and 3 short rails for a 4-hinge setup. I've never tried that one, but I'm sure it's very similar to this one here. So when you buy this thing, it'll come in a box like that, or the new ones come in a black plastic box. You'll want to take it out and you'll want to set this thing up to what you commonly use as a hinge. I use a 3-inch by 3-inch by 1/4-inch radius hinge as sort of my standard hinge that I use 90% of the time. You'll figure out which hinge that you'll like to use commonly and then set your jig up appropriately for that hinge size. This jig, when you take it out, there'll be lots of stampings on it as to where certain things need to be set or installed at. On the bed itself here, there's a black knob here that unscrews. Of course, I can't get it out. So anyway, this here knob will actually set your door thickness. So this one is set to 1 3/8 inches because that's what I commonly do. It has every other door thickness all the way up to, I think, about 2 inches that you can move these things around. The other thing is too, is that the hinge height here is what these are, and there's actually markings down here that will indicate where these need to go. This one here is set to 3 inches. If you ever need to move these hinge heights to a 4-inch hinge or something different, remember that you have to move both of these together. If you don't, you'll have a problem. The other thing is too, is that this hinge here has got, the rail here has some markings as to what a door height might be. Mine is set to 6'6" now because I primarily do basements and they're often a lot lower than 6'8". So on this particular jig, there is markings for 6'6", 6'8", and 7 foot, as well as all the way down to a 5-foot door. Do not use anything different. In the rail, there's actually a slot here where this knob will actually fit right into. If you have a door that's a different size other than what's marking on here, don't try to do it yourself because you have to adjust both this situation here as well as at the center. You'll have to realign these ones too. And to try to get the alignment of these to all line up is almost impossible to do. And if you're out by 1 millimeter or 2, you won't have a successful routering. And I'll show you why in a minute. So when you buy your jig, the bed actually comes all assembled. But anyway, put all the little pieces in there as well as these tabs also. There's 2 sets of tabs that came with mine. This set of tabs is actually for 6 to 8 foot doors, and then there's actually a shorter set that are still in my box. I've never taken them out. That is for 5 foot or 4 foot doors. I've never used them. If I have to do a 4-foot door, I do something different. But anyway, get these all on here. Make sure you got the right ones. Set the whole thing up and then flip it over and even get the other end set up exactly as you do. So make sure that the one end is exactly the same as the other end, and I'll show you why. So that's the setup. tip I would give you is that once you get this thing set up to your common hinge or your common door, put little marks on it somewhere so that as you're using it, you'll make sure that it's exactly where it's supposed to be. What I've done in the past is I've changed door thickness and I forgot to put this thing back to a 3/8 door, did my thing on the thicker door, came back, set this onto a thinner door, forgot to move it, and I wrecked a door. So that's why I always like little visual control as to where this is supposed to go. You can probably even see on here, it says the word door. That gives me to make sure that the top of the door goes here. Top of the jamb is actually there. So this difference here will give you 1/8 of an inch spacing between the top of the door and the top of the jamb. And we'll show you how that goes. One other thing that I would make an improvement on if you can, is that these pins here actually get hammered into the door or the jamb, whichever you're routering. So I would actually make little small holes next to these things where instead of hammering these pins into, you can actually screw this down to the edge of a door. The newer door material seems to be very soft, and these pins, they only stick in, I don't know if I can show it to you, they only stick in maybe a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, and sometimes it's just not enough of a grab. But anyway, that can be something else later. So the other thing that I would suggest too is that when you're putting this thing together, these knobs here have a nice knurled edge to them, is to get a pair of vice grips on them and really tighten them down good and tight. I'd even go so far as to put blue Loctite on here, at least the Loctite that I know that you can get apart, so that this won't come apart very easily. Once you get this thing set up, I wouldn't put it back in the box. I store mine just on the wall hanging as is, because it's a bit of work to try to get it in and out every time you need to use it. I use it often enough that it's not worth putting away, and it's also a bit of a pain in the butt, and you can have mistakes taking it apart and putting it back together. So put it together, make a space for it, store it, and leave it. So what I've done is I've actually built a mock-up of a left and a right-hand door. What this does is I keep this in my shop so that after I come back from the job site and I've labeled right-hand door, left-hand door, at least I keep this nearby to keep a visual control as to make sure that I'm routering the door the proper way. So how the hinge jig works is like this. So let's say in this case we're doing a left-hand door. I realize in other parts of the country they do name them differently, but this is a left-hand door. So how the hinge jig goes on is it actually goes on here like this, and you router out the door, and then you flip the jig around, and then it gets mounted here like this, and you router out the jamb. That's how it works. So the flipping part is the part that you're going to have to remember, and that gets confusing at some point. That's why when I said that there's actual notches in these rails to indicate the door heights, is to not go use something different than those. Because when you flip it, things will get out of alignment and the hinges won't line up, or I'm sorry, the routerings won't line up with the door as they will on the jamb. So I'm going to go through the router setup for the Porter Cable hinge butt kit. So there's two kinds of hinges that you can do. The common hinge that I would suggest everybody use is a 3x3 with a 1/4 inch radius. And this is the router setup here. I would also suggest that you get dedicated routers to do this, because taking this apart and putting it back together can turn into a lot of work. This is a 2 1/4 horsepower router. It is too much router for this. I just happened to buy these on sale for $90 at my tool supplier. That's where I picked them up. But if you can get a smaller little router, that's all you need, so long as you can get the template guide onto it. This is just a 1/2 inch mortising bit that is quite easily available to find. I happen to find mine here in Canada at Lee Valley Hardware, in the United States, you can get them at Rockler or pretty much anywhere. I think even Home Depot carries them as well. The template guide comes from Porter Cable inside the kit too, and you can get replacements for those also from Porter Cable. So once you get the template guide on here, it is threaded on here from the inside. I would suggest you put Loctite on those threads to make sure that it stays on there. As the router is running, it will vibrate and come loose. I've had it come loose and actually come completely off. If that happens while you're doing it, don't touch it because it gets very, very hot. Even if it just touches it for 1 second like that, I don't know why it generates so much heat, but you'll only do it once. So just be careful with that. Like I said, Loctite is always a good thing to do. I've even labeled my router, do not touch, because that's what this is for. So this is for a 1/4 inch radius setup. You've got a 1/2 inch bit. That's the way it works. Other setup I have is for a 5/8 radius hinge also. Now in the background behind me, I have a pre-hung door, I believe came from Lowe's, and it has 5/8 radius hinges on it. If you're working on a job where there's already existing doors that got 5/8 radius hinges, or you're intermixing like we do sometimes, bought pre-hung doors with ones that we have to grind ourselves. Sometimes if you want to get fussy and you want to make sure that everything matches, you can go with a 5/8 setup too. However, I would suggest trying not to do that as often as you can. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is this bit, this is an 1.25 inch bit. One, it comes from Porter Cable, and the only place I can seem to find it is on Amazon.com. Nobody really carries this bit, and it's really hard to find. It also is about, well, for us to get it here in Canada, is about $25 or more for the bit. Also, here it is. Here's a brand new one in a bag. I typically order a couple of these at a time just to have them on hand. So the reason why I've gone to a plunge-based system on this one too is because this is a very large bit to try to get into the jig itself and in and out and in and out. And if you so much as touch the side of the jig with this bit, the bit's done. I've tried to go on with after I've done that, but the routering isn't as clean, or it tends to smoke a little bit or something. It just doesn't go as smooth as a sharp bit goes. So that's why I go with a plunge on it too, because even though it's still projecting above a little bit there, it sort of keeps the bit a little bit safer. That's the setup. I won't go through all the ordeal of setting up a plunge base with this bit. It's very time consuming, and once you get it set up, you'll want to make sure that nobody touches this ever. So you don't have to go with a plunge base to do this kind of a thing. I just do it because it tends to keep the bit a little bit safer. With a 5/8 radius hinge, you're going to need a special bit from Porter Cable here. It's an 1.25 inch bit, and as you can see, the height of this bit is only a 1/2 inch. That's the critical part to it. Don't bother looking for these anywhere. Amazon.com is the only place to get them. The only other manufacturer of a bit I've seen is CMT. They make one similar. However, I've not tried it myself. I've only seen it online. The other thing is you're going to need a template guide also. This comes from, this is included in your kit that it came with, and you can get replacements of these things from Porter Cable. That's the part number there. I think that the outside dimension of this thing is the critical part to it. The other thing that you're going to want to get yourself is a set of what I call door stands. There's a good video on YouTube. I think the guy actually calls them door bucks. I think it's a bad word, but I think a door stand is a better thing. This one here only is 10 inches tall from here to here, and the spacing in here is 1.5 inches or 1 3/8 inch door. And then if you're doing 1 3/4 inch doors, you'd make the spacing 2 inches just to get it in there a little bit better. So these are very important to get also. Okay, so I've got this mounted on the door now, and we'll go over a couple of important pieces here. So I've actually hammered the pins down with a rubber mallet. Tends to give a little bit more brute force, and you'll want to give it a good hard whack. So as you can see here where the top of this thing is, see where I've marked door in the valley of that, the top of this thing here, that actually lines up with the top of the door. So as you can see, my hinge is going to go in here now. Now, the other thing is too, is that you'll see how the bevel of this door goes. You want to make sure that your butt of your hinge is on that top edge. If you do it the other way around, you're going to have a problem when it comes to hanging the door. So that's how it's all supposed to be mounted. A good way to remember this is that the big rail is actually on this side. Your router bit will go in here, go through, clean out. Your router bit will go in here, go through, and clean out. So that's kind of how the things will travel. Okay, so I'm going to router out these now. This is the 1/2 inch mortising bit setup I've got here. This bit here has to be adjusted so that the depth of it will make your hinges sit flush, as you well know. Everything routed out, and before you strip the jig off, make sure you put your hinge inside every spot that you've done, and just make sure that it is flush and everything checks out okay. And I do this before you strip the jig off because if there's a problem, you can quickly get the router, put it back on, and correct things if this isn't sitting in there quite right. So the other thing is too, when stripping the jig off, use your claw hammer or a pry bar and pry the pins out. Don't just rip the jig off. It is a little bit delicate and things can get out of alignment by doing that. So we have our jamb leg now, and this jamb leg is going to be for a left-hand door. So if we look on the one that I've made up here for the shop for a reference point, you'll see that these need to be routed like this. The other thing you can do is lay it up next to the door that you've just machined and make sure that you know where they're going to go. So we routed our door with the jig on the door like this. Now to do the jamb, you actually have to flip the jig over and mount it. So I've got the jig now mounted to the jamb leg, and I've got the door next to it just to show you how this is all supposed to go together. So we see we've machined here, and now the jamb leg is going to machine on this side here too. So the other thing is too, is that the top of this here is also to line up with the top of your jamb, and then the top of your jamb will actually go on top like this. And I'm also going to show underneath here the little black pins. You see where they're resting against the edge here now. That's very important that all 3 black pins are all resting on the edge. Probably can't tell from this camera angle. So that's how it all's supposed to go together. Again, as you've done with the door, you want to take your hinge, lay it in each individual routering just to make sure that everything is still flush and it lines up and it's checks out. The other thing is too, is to get your hinge center punch. Put that in there. Go through and punch all 9 holes on this side, as well as do all 9 holes on your door. It'll make assembly a whole lot easier. So one other thing that you can do when you're setting this thing up to avoid yourself making some mistakes as to mounting the jig on incorrectly is that there's actually a pair of pins here, okay? These ones here are really the only ones you'll ever use. I don't know why they provide these. Maybe on a super thick door you might be able to hammer both of them in at once. However, what I've done here is I've actually removed the one closest to the rail. You'll never use this. The only thing about removing it is that putting it back on might be difficult, because when you take the pin out, there's what the pin looks like. There's what the pin looks like. And there's a little black tab that's inside it that I'm assuming provides some sort of pressure so that the thing will go down and come up, and it won't just be loose. It just won't go in and out loose. It'll actually have some sort of friction to it. So once you take it out, I'm not sure how you'd get this little black thing back in there, but regardless, I would remove these if you're sort of new to doing this. That way it'll prevent you from nailing it on to either the door or the jamb incorrectly.